Hello and welcome to another segment of Interviews That Matter. I'm your host Raj Mehta. Friends, in this segment we bring those people who influence our lives. This includes elected officials, policy makers, heads of major organizations and other dignitaries. It is my sincere hope that the knowledge brought in by this guest will help our community. Today we have such guest. His name is Abe George. Coming from Indian community, he is running as a Brooklyn District Attorney in 2013 election. Let's meet Abe George. Mr. George, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. You can call me Abe, please. Call me Abe.
Oh, then call me Raj.
Okay.
That works. Thank you for joining today and thank you for taking time. First of all, congratulations, our hearty congratulations to you being an Indian American. You are running for a nice, a Brooklyn DA's office, which is very credible.
Thank you.
And we want to encourage our people to go on your path.
Thank you. Thank you.
First, let's start with your background.
Yeah.
That.
My family's from Kerala. My mom had multiple brothers and sisters. My dad had 5 brothers and sisters. Very humble beginnings, that kind of traditional immigrant story. My grandparents, although not book smart, were savvy enough to know that education is the way out, to break out, to move forward in life. And my dad became the first person in his family to become a dentist. My mom became a nurse, and she was the real pioneer for coming to America. She saw an opportunity to be a midwife in Nigeria, and she took it. And then she saw an opportunity to be a nurse in Brooklyn, and she took that opportunity by herself. And established herself first, and then brought my dad over, and we settled out in Brooklyn.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. So your parents really came. Your mom is the one who's really took a charge.
Yeah, my mom was the driving force, she
in
came in the 70s, maybe 1974.
Okay.
Came to East New York first, and then my family settled in Sheepshead Bay.
Okay. And then you were born and brought up here.
I was born in Coney Island Hospital, and my parents actually, funny enough, bought a house right across from the street.
Oh.
And when they bought this house, a lot of people don't realize now, because immigrants that come to this country now, they look at the relations or racial relations now, and things are relatively well, especially in a cosmopolitan place like New York. But back in the 80s, when my parents settled on this particular block in Ocean Parkway, it was predominantly white. We were the first brown family in a 10-block radius, and needless to say, the neighbors weren't too happy. I remember many an opportunity when, growing up, the kids in the neighborhood, the neighbors would call us Gandhi, and Gandhi was supposed to be an insult. And it's funny, as a child, you would think, oh, you felt like you were insulted. It's funny, as an adult, when you go back, you realize the importance, the greatness of Gandhi and all the things that he's done.
Right.
But as a child, that's what the neighbors would do. When we first started to come to our particular neighbor, they were throwing rocks at the house.
Oh,
they would try to get us out. They were trying to intimidate us. But, as the years grew past and our neighbors realized, just because of the color of our skin, we were just like anyone else, they grew to accustom to us, and things got better.
So I think, I must congratulate your parents that, to live within that environment.
Yeah.
It's not easy. How did they cope up with that?
I think my parents were very driven to the fact, the hospital, as I said before, the hospital where I was born, Coney Island Hospital, was less than 2 blocks away. And they were like, we want to buy a house. It was that traditional kind of immigrant mentality. Rather than renting, we want to own a home, invest in something.
Right.
And it was a convenient location. And they didn't really see the world with color lines. And they were like, look, we're going to buy a house on this particular block. There wasn't a big Indian community in Brooklyn in this particular part of the nation. Now it's a lot different. But back then, there weren't any other Indian immigrants there, and they braved it out. They bought a place there, and my mom and dad both worked at the hospital. My mom was a nurse.
Oh, okay.
My dad, although a dentist in India, worked at patient accounts in the hospital, and they worked there for many years.
Okay.
My mom just retired after 30 years of working at Coney Island Hospital.
Congratulations to her. So it's really like, it was a convenience because it was just 2 blocks away from the work.
It was a good neighborhood, and it was very convenient, yeah.
But then, when other people like trying to intimidate them, how did they cope up with them?
It's very,
if you remember.
It's almost like the Mahatma Gandhi way. It's not like we'd go to war.
Right.
We'd wait it out. And we'd talk to our neighbors and, kind of sitting them down, making them realize that we were just like them, My parents, when they went apple picking, They would bring apples for the neighbors or anything like that to try to extend good faith and let our neighbors know who we were.
So you have to go one extra mile
Oh yeah.
in order to.
It's more than just turning the other cheek. It's
Right.
almost you have to embrace
Right.
people that don't like you.
Right, right, right. And then now let's hear about your upbringing.
So public school my whole life in Brooklyn. Went to NYU undergrad. And Raj, I broke my mother's heart when I went to law school.
She wanted you to be doctor.
Yeah.
See, there you
So
go.
I got accepted to Hofstra Law, almost on a full scholarship. And I remember the day that I got into Hofstra Law, and my mom was in tears. And I was like, "What's the matter?" And I realized after the fact that it was because she realized her dream of me being a doctor wouldn't be fulfilled. My dad, as I said before, in India was a dentist. My mom was a nurse. And as you know, Raj, it's not typical for Indian Americans to pursue, or Indians generally to pursue, a path of law.
Right.
And my mom's main concern was really like, how are you going to survive as a lawyer? She saw that, hey, there weren't a lot of Indian lawyers out there, and she was afraid that how are you going to get clients that are you're not going to have a ton of clients that are Indian. Are white clients going to come to you? And I was like, Mom, I don't see the world really on those lines. I think that as the years progress, if I'm a good lawyer, people are going to hire me. And I always thought that the role of a lawyer was an interesting thing. I had a romanticized view of the law. I always thought a lawyer was someone that fights for someone, that stands up for the little guy, that gives someone a voice. And that was all the noble kind of calling that I saw as law. I mean, look, we joke around lawyers nowadays, they're sharks, they're all in it for the money, but that's not the type of lawyer that I wanted to be or how I viewed the law.
Okay. Okay, so how did you start your career then after
So Hofstra, when I went to Hofstra Law not too
Right.
far from here, and that's when I realized that, hey, you need to intern in places to figure out what type of law you wanted to practice.
Right.
And it was really when I interned at the Queens DA's office in the homicide unit and back at the Manhattan DA's office for the summer that I realized that I wanted to be a prosecutor. See, it was funny because my parents were both public servants. My mom, as I said, worked for Coney Island Hospital for almost 30 years. My dad had worked for the same hospital for almost 15 years. They were public servants. They were giving back. And for me, I realized that public service was where I wanted to be in life. I wanted to give back. And amongst the jobs and the internships I took, working at the DA's office, being a prosecutor, I felt that was a way to give back. You can not only be a great litigator, get into a courtroom, argue your point, but what you were doing simultaneously was fighting for people, fighting for victims, making communities safer. And I started to love the area of being a prosecutor because I felt that a conscientious prosecutor wasn't about just securing convictions and putting people behind bars. It was understanding who the person you were, where they were coming from, and deciding that, hey, not every case needs to result necessarily in the person on the other side of the table going to jail for a long period of time. Sometimes jail isn't the appropriate remedy for a person that you're prosecuting, and sometimes justice doesn't result in a conviction. Sometimes justice results in a case being dismissed.
Right.
And so that's when I really fell in love with, all right, I wanted to be a prosecutor. And when I graduated Hofstra Law, I was lucky enough to be hired by Robert Morgenthau from the Manhattan DA's office. And he is, I don't know if you know him, Raj, but he's one of the greatest prosecutors in the country.
Right.
And when I got that opportunity to work for him, I seized it. And in fact, I remember one day that, my dad was kind of that traditional Indian character, very stoic, didn't really have much of an expression with their children. It's kind of like they were proud of you, and they would let you know by providing you with, with school, with a house, with fun, with money for school, things like that. But it would never be a dialogue. But I remember the day I got the job for Robert Morgenthau, I heard my dad on the phone talking to his friend. He said, "Oh, my son got a job for Robert Morgenthau." So I knew he was very proud.
Oh, okay. Okay. And when did you get that job?
I started there in the fall of 2004. I'd interned there the summer before,
Okay.
and I started there in the fall of 2004.
And how long you were there?
I was there for 8 years until last summer when I
Okay.
resigned to run for Brooklyn DA. But while I was at the Manhattan DA's office, I did all sorts of type of cases, mostly concentrating on violent crime. I was doing narcotics, working on dismantling gangs, working on cold case homicides. And to the people that don't know, a cold case homicide is just a murder that's remained unsolved, and I was working on trying to solve those murders. So, I spent a good deal of my career working on violent crime, and just last summer, I decided to resign and run for Brooklyn DA.
Okay, that's very nice. I mean, so 8 years of experience with as an assistant DA.
Correct.
And mostly focusing on violent crimes.
Correct.
Okay, so obviously, when you run for district attorney's office, I mean, that's a much bigger scope.
Sure.
Than just one aspect of it, right?
Correct.
So obviously, you're willing to take all these other aspects, or
Yeah.
the challenges rather.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so, my experience, very early on in my career, while I was in a specialized citywide task force focusing on narcotics throughout the city,
Okay.
I got the chance to work on a housing project in Brooklyn, in Brownsville. And it was while I was working in this particular housing project, it was rated one of the 10 most dangerous in the city. And an agency of the city came to our office and said, hey, we have a problem with this particular housing development. And I was happy because I was a Brooklyn boy. And I've always wanted to work on Brooklyn cases. So when this opportunity came up, I was like, I was like happy to take the lead and spearhead an investigation that looked into this particular housing development. And this was an area, Raj, that police officers, if they had to respond to a 911 call, wouldn't go alone.
Wow.
They would have to come with 3 police cars.
Wow.
There was only one entrance in, one entrance out. 380 housing units, only 100 of which were legally occupied. And it was just a nightmare to the residents that were living there lawfully, and it was just a terrible place where children really couldn't play. And it was a place that we spent about a year investigating, and we really turned the place around. I mean, now this housing development is nowhere near where it used to be. Cops can walk the beat, children can play, the community centers back in the area, and that was when I first started to have the seeds of, hey, I want to be the district attorney of Brooklyn.
Okay.
I want to make neighborhoods safer. And I really started to pay close attention to what was happening on the ground in Brooklyn. While I was in Manhattan, and I loved being in Manhattan, I loved working for Robert Morgenthau, but my heart was in Brooklyn. That's where I was born and raised. That's where I'd go lay my head at the end of the day.
Right.
And as many strides as we were making in Manhattan, making communities safer, I didn't see the same thing happen in Brooklyn. Here's what I saw. I saw Brooklyn that led the city in homicides and shootings. I saw a Brooklyn DA's office that was allowing, I think, abusive policies such as stop and frisk and the over-prosecution of nonviolent marijuana cases try to quell that tide of violent crime. I saw wrongful convictions, cases where you had defendants spend over 16 years in jail. A guy named Jabbar Collins spent 16 years in jail because a prosecutor decided that he wasn't going to turn over and follow the law, turn over exculpatory material that tended to show the defendant was innocent of committing these crimes, because the focus was about getting a conviction. And this wasn't happening once a year, Raj. It was happening month after month. I saw that we had an office that wasn't dealing with emerging crimes, like cyber crimes and identity theft, one of the fastest emerging crimes there are. This office didn't have a unit to handle that. And Raj, most shockingly, about a year ago, the New York Times reported that the district attorney wasn't zealously prosecuting child pedophiles because it would cost him electoral votes. And that's when I decided that I needed to resign and run for this position, because someone needed to stand up for the children and for the people of Brooklyn.
Right.
We've had a DA that's been in office for over a quarter century. Brooklyn's changed during that period of time. I mean, if you think about it, when my opponent, Charles Hines, was running back in 1989,
Right.
Ronald Reagan was president, George Bush was vice president. We were ending the Cold War, and we didn't have the internet.
Right.
I mean, Brooklyn's changed. It's time we have a new DA that reflects the population of Brooklyn.
Well, Abe, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
Please stay with us. Welcome back. We are having a conversation with Abe George, who is running for Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so now let's talk about the election. Election is in basically in Brooklyn. The primary decides the election because there is no Republican Party there. So you're going to have a primary with 23-year veteran Charles Hines, and there is one more person, Ken Thompson, who is also running for that, right? How is your campaign going now?
It's going really well. When you think about where I came from, Raj,
Right.
the biggest story in the city
Right.
is really the fact that a guy like me, a guy that's been a public servant for 8 years, managed in a 6-month period to raise $210,000. That's unheard of, Raj. The incumbent himself only raised $27,000 during that same 6-month period. So it really is going better than expected. And why is it going better? Because when I sit down and talk to people and I tell them about what's went wrong, here's what we could do better. We've had a DA that's been in this position for 20. Look, a lot of people in Brooklyn don't realize the DA is an elected slot. They think the governor appoints the DA. So when you get out there in the streets and you tell people, no, this is an elected position.
Right.
Here are the things that we can change if we have a new DA. People are receptive to it, and we're building a great grassroots movement. And you know, we recently had a great support from a guy named David Boyce, one of the most prominent lawyers in the country, who gave us a maximum contribution, who really believed in who I was, feeling that I was the right guy for this job and that there needed to be change in Brooklyn.
So you think the biggest challenge with this campaign is raising funds?
The biggest challenge in any political race is raising funds. You know, and especially with someone that hasn't been out in private practice like myself. I've been a career prosecutor. It's even more of a challenge. But I find that when we talk about the message, and not only just what the problems are, but what the solutions are, that we're picking up some momentum. I can't say that I will raise the most money in this campaign, but I'll provide the most solutions to the problems that we're facing. So I think with just spreading the message and more voter contact, we're going to see that we've got a great chance to win. And Raj, if you look at the election numbers, most people will say that, hey, if you're running against an incumbent, it's crazy. Incumbents can't be beat. But if you look at the election numbers themselves, back in 2005 was the last time that Mr. Hines ran a competitive primary. And in 2005, nearly 60% of people didn't vote for Joe Hines. They voted for the other 3 candidates. Mr. Hines skated by with less than 5,000 votes. And if you look at the population of Brooklyn in 2005 compared to 13, we've changed. So I think there's a good momentum for change in Brooklyn. And I think we're building upon that.
So basically votes were divided in 2005, and that's how Charles Hines was able to.
Correct. But the aggregate number was that more than half the people walking in didn't vote for the existing DA. And I think those people aren't going to come back and say, oh, you know what, I decided Joe Hines is going to be the right guy. They've made a choice in their minds that they wanted change. And I think if you look at the primary before that, 2001, you had a woman that had less than $10,000, one-on-one. She got nearly 40% of the vote. That's unheard of. For an incumbent DA to be sitting in office and a woman with not much means, not much name, reputation, to get almost 40% of the vote, that just shows a trend here. We get 40% for this woman in 2001. In 2005, more than half the people don't vote for Joe Hines. We're moving in a trajectory towards Mr. Hines losing. I think he's probably the most vulnerable incumbent in the state.
So then, let me ask you this, the 2005, after that there was no opposition.
Yeah, for some reason, and Roger, this is part of the reason that I'm in this race. I saw 2009 come around, and I was a Manhattan DA at the time, and I was expecting someone to run. You know, we saw he was vulnerable in 2005. We had issues in 2009, but no one stood up to fight. And when I was thinking about doing this early in 2011, 2010, I was waiting around. I was seeing the political climate. There wasn't even a mention of anyone running in this race. There wasn't even talks that anyone would be willing to take on an incumbent. Why? Because the typical philosophy is that you can't beat a sitting incumbent. Right. But those are people that aren't looking at the election numbers. I think you got to look at the numbers, and when you see the numbers, you realize he's vulnerable. But once again, no one ran in 09. And I said, someone's got to sit here and fight. I mean, when you have a district attorney that's pursuing a policy of politics, not zealously prosecuting child sexual offenders, not zealously saying that, hey, our office isn't about just getting a conviction. It's about doing the right thing. That's when I think it dictates a change in direction. Everything I learned in the Manhattan DA's office, being there, learning that it's all about justice, it's not about the necessarily outcome of getting a conviction, kind of groomed me for this particular slot.
So now if you look at Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
And where do you think your support is, like majority of your support now, as opposed to Ken Thompson, I'm talking about? Like, because see, what I'm thinking is, okay, Ken Thompson is going to share your votes, basically, correct? So thinking that, okay, well, where is his hold, where is your hold, and what that makes up of that?
You know, a lot of pundits, they always go, what's your base? What's your base? My base is Brooklyn. Because if you look at the election results here, going back, 2005, he only got 40% of the electoral vote on that. That means 60% of the population is ready for change. But keep in mind this, there have been more negative press about Hines from 2009 to the present than there's been almost in his entire career. The Daily News itself has written 53 editorials against Joe Hines. 53. Wow. The New York Times has done a big piece against them. The Daily News, the Post has all written very critical articles, particularly about his position regarding regarding pedophiles. So I think the 40% was a high watermark for Joe Hines. So what are we talking about? There's maybe a 70% pool of people out there that are ready for change. Right. And I don't think there's a particular niche that I have, but I think what voters are looking for are answers. Right. Not just what the problems are, what the answers are. What's your solution? And if you look at all three campaigns, I'm the only candidate that's proposing solutions. Look, one of the biggest problems I think that voters are talking about, especially prime voters, that and people that come out to vote in a primary, they're typically people that come out every primary. Like, we're not talking about the November election, we're talking about a September election. And those people are concerned about issues such as stop and frisk, right? Stop and frisk is an important police tool, but it's been abused over the last several years. And what we've seen is a disproportionate amount of minorities that have been affected by this policy. And not only am I saying that, hey, the police officers have to follow the law, but I'm also proposing a solution. My solution is twofold. If there's an arrest that's predicated on stop and frisk, we need to have our office directly interview the officer. But the second part of that is a policy change and how we view laws like marijuana. Marijuana has often been a justification for stop and frisk, because if you stop someone, you pull out whatever they have in their pocket, and even though if marijuana in your pocket is supposed to be a violation, sometimes when they take the marijuana out, they say, oh, that's a crime, it's in plain view. And there was a big bill in the legislature last year where they were trying to decriminalize marijuana in plain view. If you had a small amount in plain view, they wanted to make it a violation, not a crime, right? But that bill didn't pass. It got stuck in the state Senate. As district attorney, I would change that policy. Day one, I would tell the police department that if someone's recovered with marijuana in plain view, a small amount, we're just pursuing that as a violation. Why? To quell this tide of the abusive nature of stop and frisk. We've had it disproportionately affect a large amount of our community, and we need to change that. So two policies right off the bat to quell stop and frisk. But let's go further. We need to change the way we fight crime. Crime right now is fought, I think, in some instances in a reactionary way. The police make an arrest and we prosecute those cases. Right. We have to fight crime smarter, intelligence-based prosecution. And what do I mean by that? Well, you have any neighborhood, right? You have a local precinct that governs a particular area. You have uniformed police officers on the ground, detectives that are, wearing the suits that investigate certain crimes within a given neighborhood. They don't always talk to each other, the guys on the ground in uniform and the detectives. They don't share their intelligence on the crime problems in a certain area. Plus, on top of the precinct, you have a narcotics unit. You have a gang unit. You may even have a housing unit. All those different entities kind of police the same neighborhood, but don't necessarily share intelligence. Who else has information on crime problems? The community, elected officials, the school system, because the school system knows, hey, which kids aren't coming to class, which kids are giving us a problem. Go to family court, because we know that before people get into the adult criminal justice system, they've got issues in family court before they get to us. So we have all this intelligence, and you as a software guy would appreciate this, right? Absolutely. You have all this intel out there, and there's an information disconnect.
Data warehouse. Yep.
And what we need to do is coordinate all that intelligence, get into a computer, analyze that data, and now the DA needs a blueprint. They can provide a blueprint for the police department saying, hey, this neighborhood has 10 problem players. Let's formulate a long-term investigation to take care of these individuals. It's not about stopping everybody. It's about stopping the right people and doing it in a smarter way. So that's what I'm talking about, Raj. It's not only saying, here's problems, what are our solutions? And so I think when voters look at that and they see who the candidates are and what the ideas are and how we're going to fight crime, there's only one guy that's got identify the problem and identify the solution, and that's me.
Okay. Viewers of our show is South Asian population, right? And obviously, South Asian population is behind you. You're one of our own, So, What do you expect from us as a a community, and what in return, what do you think you are going to do for our community, basically? Because it's all like give and take.
It's funny, and Raj, we were talking about this before we even went on air. I think it's been I thought it was going to be a lot easier in terms of, growing up as a South Asian, particularly an Indian American,
Right.
there isn't one, first of all, there's not one Indian elected official in New York City or in Nassau or Suffolk. I mean, that's amazing given our time, given how strong our community has become, not only in jobs and business and wealth, but we have not yet realized that one of the big power bases there are is political power. And our
Absolutely.
community is yet to realize that.
Yep.
And I thought very easily, being an Indian American candidate out there, that there would be more support.
Right.
But as I told you before we started, I think a lot of people out there want to see that you win first before they support you. But look, that's life, right? A lot of
Right.
people want to bet on a winner,
Right,
right?
right.
They don't necessarily want to bet on someone that's an unknown.
Right,
And so,
right.
I'm trying to connect more to, and I think a lot of people that realize this, a lot of people that are a little more connected, understand, look, in order to get someone, and like the perfect example is John Liu. I know people have different opinions of him as mayor, on his campaign for mayor, but look at a guy like John Liu. I mean, this was a guy that people from all over New York City, when he was running for city council, supported. It didn't matter that he was running in Flushing as a city councilman. They saw
Right.
an Asian American,
Right.
and people from all over the city backed him, right? Then he became a city controller, and now where he is, he's on the pathway to running for mayor,
Right,
right?
right.
We can't groom candidates like Bobby Jindal,
Right.
candidates like Nikki Haley,
Right.
without at least starting small. And the problem is, if you look at the incubator,
Right.
look at the nursery of where we have our candidates, there's no one there. There's no one in the hopper that we can groom along. So I think it's very important. What I'm trying to connect is, I know you live in Queens.
Right.
I know you live in Nassau. I know you live in Suffolk. I know you live outside of New York.
Right.
But this is an important race. Why is it an important race? Because if we want to see an Indian elected in some position of power, we have to start small. And I think in terms of, look, I'm fighting for everyone in Brooklyn. And, the Indian population is probably not the largest out there.
Right.
But I also see this as giving a voice to our community. That if there's an issue relevant to the Indian community, finally there could be someone that acknowledges. Look, I'll tell you one big issue that the Sikhs are facing in the NYPD, the issue of wearing their turbans.
Right.
There's been a big debate on whether or not they should be allowed to wear their turban. But yet the only elected that's really coming forward and fighting for that is John Liu, right? And I think he understands, coming from that kind of ilk of the Asian American population, seeing where we're coming from.
Right.
He understands that problem, but we don't have the voice yet to necessarily fight for that. And I think that those are issues that I think that you can count on me fighting for in terms of our community. But like I said, look, my first responsibility will be to the 2.5 million people in Brooklyn. But also I see this as also an inspiration, hopefully, to other people in our community that, hey, politics is not necessarily this evil thing, that it's a good thing, and it's a way to give our community a voice.
I totally agree with you. And we like more people like you. We want more people like you from our community. And the whole purpose of this show is really to educate people and to have them participate more into the political process of this country, because that's the next thing we need to do. Okay, like we are very happy, we are very successful individually. Everybody is like, happy in their own family and in their friends and everything. We need to go next step now. And then, we need to, as you said, there's not, it's sad that we don't have anyone elected officials in the New York City or in Long Island, actually. That's very sad. And then also in state, actually. In fact, there is no state legislator which is Indian American. So, I mean, having a largest population, most successful people in, we have the highest median income in all other communities. I mean, we definitely should learn something from you, and community should learn something from you, and more people should come up to a plate. And we support you wholeheartedly.
Thank you. And if I could just talk about the website.
Absolutely.
It's Abe George 2013, ABEGEORGE 2013. Look, I'd urge anyone that's sitting at home watching this right now, I don't care if it's $1, $5, $10, come to the website, donate something, show your support. If you really believe in this mission of having someone represent our community, I'd say this is the race that you need to get involved with. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you, Abe, for coming on the show. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you can email me at rajmitv@gmail.com. Again, that's rajmitv@gmail.com. If you would like to watch our prior air show, you can go on YouTube, youtube.com/Infosys International. Until next time, see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.